Welcome, dear viewers. Today we want to talk about the desert, more specifically how to make them green. And to help with that, I have a specialist here, Majid Abdelaziz. A warm welcome to you. Thank you. You're making large projects in North Africa, Algeria, and so on to irrigate the deserts. But not with conventional technology. Rather, it's about Wilhelm Reich, energy, orgone, and so on. But first, tell me how you got there, and what's happening there. Yes, how one arrives to something like this is not by accident. I thought maybe it was coincidental, but as I've learned, there are no coincidences. I'm an engineer by profession, and I study computer science. Before that, I also worked with both refrigeration and electrical engineering. So I worked at VW at the time. And at some point I got kind of, not tired, but I found the work boring. Just sitting in front of large screens and CAD and traveling for the company. That didn't fulfill me, so I was thinking, is this it? Yeah, besides family and stuff, is this it? Then I got to know someone who had a huge project in the desert. He invited me, and somehow I stuck around a bit there. They say that when you get to know the desert, it's not for the first time, and when you leave it, it's not for the last time. And I can say, for me, that notion was more extreme because at the time we had this product in the middle of the revolt in Algeria, terrorism and so on, and we didn't want this area in Garnet to be forgotten in Algiers. And Mr. Kirali, that was his name, not to somehow get in trouble because he was only a tourist. Then I organized the ITB here in Berlin, and we invited the Tuaregs for the first time. And the people were so excited to see real Tuaregs, properly, in traditional costume in Berlin. Then, right after, in '94, my tour operator organized a showing of the product, and then a serious accident happened. There were approximately 17 people sitting in a helicopter. I, thank God, somehow was compelled to not board the helicopter at the last minute because I had seen some plastic and trash strewn about. It seemed like this was fate. Fate. Coincidence? This helicopter then crashed. They all died, and I'm the only one who survived, and I was distraught. I was in shock. Then, at this time, one of the Tuaregs came to me and said, "Yes, you didn't die because the desert needs you." Okay, but I don't want to go to the desert again. And right after that, a good friend who painted a huge work of art for us in Berlin for the ITB, with the desert and camels and so on, her name was Alphonse. As a thank you, I wanted to take her with me, and she also died there. Her boyfriend, Ingo, he's a physiotherapist, still living in Berlin. We had to be there for each other. And at one point we were visiting and he wanted to go out. He said something like, "Come with me, I'm going to an event." At this time he was on this esoteric trip involving babachi, baked goods, and yoga. I came with him, and on that evening, an event at the FAW in Berlin with Bernd Senf. We walked there, sat down, and the event was about Wilhelm Reich. They were talking about this operation, Operation Orgone, and it was about rain. I sat there, and somehow the whole thing just worked on me. I could not get enough of this topic, and I was amazed. The first question I asked myself, I thought, if there's a problem like this, and 52 similar cases in Arizona, these problems are going global, and there's also a method of making rain. The device Wilhelm Reich has made. Yes, yes. And why don't they use that? I tried to contact Bernd Senf. He was very nice, and I was surprised because he told me that Wilhelm Reich even had been sent to prison because of this device. The orgone box he built back then. The accumulator. Yes, yes. This accumulator and this battery were harmless, but they really put him in prison for life. He then died in '57. His writings were burned soon after and prohibited. I couldn't stop marveling about this. And if you learn about Bernd Senf, his story is not just about Wilhelm Reich. It's about Lakowski, it's about Schauberger, it's about Priori, it's about Silvio Gesell and money. This means there were so many more things to learn, and that all touched me so deeply. I thought, this cannot be how these people lived, especially with Tesla. I really felt his story very strongly because I came from an electrical engineering background. In high school, I remember I was sitting in a room. It was study hall in the evening. We'd just learned about stators, about these windings and these bobine, what we called them. And in the studio where we had all these things, a kind of workshop, I had a little bit of copper and a stator, which I took away, and then I began working. I wrapped it, combined with a battery, and I yelled, "It works!" And everyone came up to me and said, "Yeah, look, it works!" Because we all heard the theory. We thought, well, it functions. Then it hit me, and I thought, it's just like back then. Why did Wilhelm Reich, who has had such an inspiring method, why did his work remain stuck like that? What's behind all of it? What kind of a world are we living in? Everyone tells you that they want the best quality, but somehow, something just doesn't add up. Is it a science that is incumbent? The physicists say, there are physical laws and these sorts of things contradict the laws and cannot exist. Right? What's happening here? Yes, when you look at Wilhelm Reich, I have to say there are various approaches to his work. The first time you come to know Wilhelm Reich, your first impression is usually negative. To explain, I have to go back a bit. My first encounter with Wilhelm Reich's story was in Amberg in 1972. I had learned German there at the Goethe Institute in Freiburg. I went to Amberg, and I was a trainee at Siemens. And there I had a friend, a colleague, and he invited me to stay with him for a while. I said, okay, if there's no rent, sure. Because where I lived, Amersfoort, was a much farther drive to get to the work taking the bus. Then I said, all right, I'll come over on the weekend and I'll stay with you. I went there and relaxed, and there was the stairway that went up. All of a sudden, I see a girl coming down naked. His daughter. My friend said, don't stare. And I said, what on earth is going on? Then later, her brother also walked in completely naked. Gerhard was his name. And then they just sat there and ate breakfast with us. I tried to be as normal as possible. Again, this was my first encounter with Wilhelm Reich's teachings. Then we started talking, and I had to ask, why are you all naked? My friend looked at me and asked if I've ever heard of Wilhelm Reich. And that's apparently what he preaches. This was a very negative first impression, I have to say. It was such a shock for me back then, too. But once you learn more and start to see Wilhelm Reich differently, the orgone physics, or the scientific components, things start to change, as I learned at Bernd Senf. Because Bernd Senf has a certain way about him, I have to say. I recommend everyone check out his videos online. In the beginning, it starts with psychoanalysis. It starts with pleasure, and then passes to the biome experiments, and then there are character tanks. But none of this is coincidence, really. You can see there's a red thread, and if you take this thread as a whole, then it makes sense. Simple. He also invented some kind of mathematics, as he explains. Functionalism. Where he says, In spite of all the differences, like hatred and love, for example, they're based on the same energy. And if you go deeper, you'll even get in touch with Hermetic laws, like up and down. In spite of all the differences he discovered, for example, with the biomes, you could use Earth. And then we have this Lovelock, Gaia, the Gaia principle. Wilhelm Reich also explained this in his time when he saw the biome, this blue effect, orgone, the same energy he used in his orgone accumulators. So basically, as I understand, there's light even in total darkness. Light. Lighting something even though there's no light source. Yes. And then he states that this blue is the blue of heaven, which we see if we look at the Earth like a biome. Our heaven, what we're actually seeing is this orgone energy. It's simple when it's explained like that, right? And then with Wilhelm Reich, for the first time ever, I got a much deeper understanding of the weather, like areas of high and low pressure and so on. That it's not just the warm air that flows in, rather, it's all connected. At that time, he had what was called superimpulsion. It's about jet streams, about galaxies. He didn't have the information we're seeing with satellites now. But he still drew them, and he could explain why they were swirling in this and that direction, and east to west, and so forth. So there are energies. Now, let's move on to the desert sensation. So what? Is there an energetic problem in the desert? That there's no rain, right? Yeah, that's an energetic problem. It wasn't just Wilhelm Reich alone at that time who called it solidification of the atmosphere, what Reich calls Dor, or deadly orgone. I see. The orgone, you can define it as l'énergie vitale, which means life force. Life force, or life energy. We can see that in the human body. We can see it in a leaf. We can see it in all organisms. If this life force or life energy, this orgone, for example, is there, it all works and organizes everything in harmony. My liver, my kidney, they allow me to be here as a human being. And if this energy disappears or is frozen, then disease arises. And with disease comes destruction instead of organization, and everything begins to decompose. That means in the desert, it's a matter of radioactivity. Everyone knows that in Algeria, for example, in the 1960s, when the French were there with Reagan, they began Operation Gerboise, among other things, and performed underground and above-ground nuclear tests. I think it was about 65, and we can still feel the negative energy from that to this day. That means if I work for 2 or 3 years, I'm gonna have to repair that with the Cloudbuster. And that's what this is about. And it's interesting for Japan later on. Yeah, exactly. Currently, Japan's an important issue as well, but again, let's come to the energy in the desert. Can you tell me why exactly? Is the energy not flowing there, or what? Correct. The energy does not flow as it should. We can look at it like that. If we take a chart, the z-axis and the x-axis, and then we have an area where the harmonics, or vibrations. Let's call them curves, or the sinus. That's orgone. Then we have an area where it's whipped. That's the Uraner effect, as he calls it. It's related to radioactivity because he took 1 milligram or 2 of radium at the time. He used them to see if one could reduce the half values. And that's a problem we have with these fuel rods. What do we do with this garbage? He said, if I put this in the orgone accumulator now, what happens? But the opposite of what he expected happened. It became more. That means that, he pointed out clearly back then, an atom, an electric plant, a nuclear power plant, these cannot be isolated from radioactivity. It will get out, whether we have lead or whatever. Later, I think 5 years ago, the French admitted that the vegetation near AKW's forest was dying, which he had noticed at the time, and many children contracted leukemia. Yes, we have a lot of those things here too. Yes, that's the case. That means it's being whipped up. That means nature is becoming sick after all of this, and then there's going to be solidification. So if the curve doesn't work, we end up with straight lines. And that's DOR, deadly orgone. So orgone, uraner is orgone anti-nuclear, which means, like with radioactivity, there will be DOR or solidification. And if there's solidification, he noticed that even the stones in his laboratory in Maine had become black and fractured. But he almost did this after he built this cloudbuster. No, not after. Because of Wilhelm Reich. That's why I said earlier, with Reich, there's a red thread. Yes. There's a lot to take in. That's the genius of Wilhelm Reich. He had his sexuality, he had psychology, therapy, bioenergy. He noticed that there were, on the edge of the river, pipes that were placed running parallel to each other. He had been working on something different, and he noticed that they were somehow radiating energy in the water. He just knew it. He didn't write it down, but that knowledge was with him. That's what's phenomenal about him. Like, for example, Tesla. He could visualize it before he'd even done anything. He saw it like that. With Wilhelm Reich, he had a lot of things, and he didn't forget them. Then he remembered these pipes in their dramatic fashion, this DOR, this uraner. Streaks of black clouds were forming, and everything was sick, and the birds disappeared from the area. He remembered that, and intuitively took those pipes and directed them towards heaven. Then combined the pipes with water. He thought that water would pull out the DOR energy. Yes, the gamma radiations of radioactivity. And he noticed, wow, something's really happening here. Not even 2 hours later returned that blue effect, the shining blue. The sky was revived. And then there were other clouds. Then later he performed experiments. For example, if he directed, let's say, the tube directly onto a cloud, the cloud became weak. That means there was potential for orgone. He somehow discovered the properties and wrote them down, and the cloud became small. If he weakened the areas next to it, because the cloud is an orgone structure, it became bigger. And so it came as a side effect that I could make it rain with it as well by increasing or reducing clouds. But the first step was how to eliminate the radioactivity that has now been created. I see. Right. We'll stick with the desert first. You've applied this method in concrete terms. Are you really putting a cloudbuster in the sky to concentrate clouds? And does it work? Yes, I am. But I would not call my method a cloudbuster. I'm not destroying clouds. What I do is sky acupuncture, or I call the whole system integral environmental healing. Yes, the feng shui of heaven. I need to get the energy into the flow, and when it flows, a miracle happens. We have an area of desert that has little chemical radiation now, so you can understand Wilhelm Reich's work. We have H2O, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Hydrogen, oxygen. They come, and a cloud appears in the area. Orgone in this DOR area where it's frozen and crushing everything. What's happening with that? The hydrogens stay alone, and the oxygens stay alone. And under this surrounding area, this DOR energy, this frozen zone, these oxygen molecules that are now floating out there form O3. That's ozone. Ozone, yes, but now, and they stay so long. If I get rid of the DOR again, these oxygen molecules have no life. How do they stay? They're broken and free, and they're forming into hydrogen, which becomes present under different conditions. That's why many scientists question, where in the desert is this moisture coming from? Yeah, that's the explanation. Yeah, and you really see there's a cloud coming from nothing, and another, and another. You have to do that. That's the skill of working with the device, that those clouds grow and grow along with the potential, until the area is full of clouds, and of course, that leads to rain. You can see it in my movie. There are lots of things I filmed back then. Yeah, not so good. I'm not a professional, but I think people who watch these movies, they'll easily understand. Yes, very fascinating. Are there any other things you can do in the desert if nothing grows? If it's just raining and still nothing's happening? Is there anything else happening on the ground where you say, we'll build up energy with stones, or something? I don't know. What can you do? Yeah, back when we were looking for this area, it was really lifeless. You realize that, as anyone would. He's crazy to be doing something like this out here. Then we started knocking these stones according to old druidic and/or shamanic knowledge, as people call it. The noise polarizes the whole thing. So the stones have a positive and negative, so to speak. Yes, yes. And then we've had products from the Penn Energetic company that worked with me and supported me back then. That's Plocher. That was the father of them. Daniel, he made some products available to me. For me, it was about making rain in the desert. Because there's a Tuareg proverb saying, never try sleeping or settling your camp in a dry riverbed. It's really true. You don't have time to realize the water is there, and before you know it, you've died. Many people have paid great prices. Why? Because the desert is dry when the rain comes. You can compare this to an electric plate where you cook. If there's just a little water, it's boiling because it's too hot. This is related to Schauberger. I'm making trees. The first of our trees we made with a cistern and poured into it 2 or 3 times a week. And they took shape in little time. When the trees are there, a little shadow will be created. And if there's shadow, the ground will be a little loose in and around the roots. I did the first cloud-busting operation in 2004, starting in late 2005 in July. And when the rain came, there was nothing like this disaster or whatever. The ground could absorb that. Yeah. Yes. These are really thoughtful steps. Many people say, oh, the rainmaker. And I always say, I don't make the rain. Rain, to me, it's just one part of the whole system, right? And this system includes, for example, let's call it orgone culture or electrical culture. All these scientists who really found something simple, which doesn't cost much, but they were all removed in a way to the disadvantage or advantage of the pharmaceutical industry or the chemical industry. Repressed, yes. If you look at Ciba-Geigy, for example, you can do a lot when you see Agnihotra. Someone wrote to me recently. He said he's smoking weed there and he's going to put the ashes out there. This is esoteric. He has no clue. You have to go somehow on the subatomic to find out what's happening with the vibrations in the desert.
Ja, das ist die Hummel. Die kommt bei mir auf der Homepage. Wie kann sie fliegen? Und die normale Wissenschaft sagt, sie kann gar nicht fliegen, aber sie ist der Beweis.
Ja, sie weiß es zum Glück nicht.
Sie weiß es nicht.
Now, we've just talked about the fact that stones have, for example, a positive and negative pole. But normally, you can't measure that. Does one have to be sensitive in this kind of work? Do you feel that way, or does anyone who works with you there begin to experience that sensitivity? What's that like? Everyone is sensitive to it, so to speak. At the same time, I can see orgone energy, those circles and stuff. I couldn't get it at first, but I caught on. Is it something you have to practice? It is a practiced thing, yes. I advise everyone to try it out. It's a practice for both halves of your brain, the left and the right. We have creativity on the right and mathematical on the left. That means my right hand goes to the left and my left goes to the right. If you remember, when we were kids, we were forbidden to write with our left hand. It seems that was their way of stifling our creativity, or at least that's my interpretation now. Okay. I've always tried to draw or something with my left hand, even when I was little, in an effort to activate the right side of my brain. And you can either do that or you can't. When people ask me how I can see these sorts of things, I tell them, I notice there are pictures that are blurry when you look at them normally. But when you bring them into focus, slowly and deliberately, you can make out a 3D picture. That's a very, very good exercise to activate this, because the moment you see it, you're surprised. Then it's like an exemption. You notice it because the two halves of the brain are finally really synchronized. So, you're able to see something that you can't normally see. Yes, yes. And this is the first time you realize that this sort of seeing and thinking has been repressed, that this method of thinking had been turned off so easily. Things can't always be like this. What are we doing? And all of a sudden, you're in touch with a piece of truth. You're in touch with a reality that was somehow hidden before. There's a blurry 2D image, and I'm looking at it, I don't understand. And as soon as I think, that can't be, all of a sudden it really clicks into place. Something happens in the brain, and yeah, you can just see it. That is a good exercise. It is a very good exercise. Yes, I really recommend everyone try it. I don't know, at the time, those pictures were in every newspaper and stuff. Yeah, it was such a hype. That was the hip thing to do, I remember. I never had any problem seeing it. I've been able to see it without any concentration. Yes, people at the beginning didn't see it. But once you're in, then you see it instantly. Let us come back to the Cloudbuster. So, Wilhelm Reich had discovered something, and now there are Cloudbusters everywhere in various stages of development. People with these copper tubes and crystals on the bottom of it. And I don't know, what do you think? Are these helping anything? There are many movements. There's someone who created this, and that is Dan Kraft. I think he's very competent, and what he did doesn't come out of thin air. The things you do with it... Simple example. How does a Cloudbuster work if you really dive deep into it? Because I've been getting more involved with this method. And in the middle of the desert, I'm using just a small pool. I'm working with this pyramid energy, so to speak. And I know what's around, what's happening to the gaseous water, why it doesn't store door. That means we are breaking up a door, a solidification in the atmosphere. What's happening in a chembuster? A chembuster is usually in a bucket, and this bucket is a mixture of resin and shavings. Yes. Now, what's that? That's an orgone accumulator. What's an orgone accumulator doing? It's got energy, and this energy must be flown out of the tubes. This is the opposite of the Cloudbuster, which draws in energy, and that's shiny. And if it's radiating at the beginning, I may be able to solve these stripes. But I can do this very well with a Cloudbuster. The Cloudbuster also builds clouds, and it mixes them and removes everything that's coming with a strong wind. But a chembuster will erase. What happens then? Well, for example, this orgone takes what's above, and there's another orgone below. You can compare them like that. If you spot a beautiful lady nearby, you can chat her up for a minute or two, but after an hour or 2 hours, you get rejected because that's too much, yeah? That's the problem. Those chembusters don't stop. They're always going. Yes, that won't go well. It won't, right? And I'm letting everyone who uses it know this. Like Lionel Richie. I believe he's an architect in Africa. I'm not saying I know everything or that I'm in any position to advise them, just that they might get to the heart of how to turn it off, because I've turned my device off. Yes, I haven't used it for 2 years. And it worked. It's about strengthening the earth in its natural origin, where it was still strong, to strengthen its immune system. But I wouldn't feed and feed and feed a recovering patient until they burst. That's the problem with the Chembuster. I've only built one, and I'm trying to find solutions. How to turn it off or turn it on. Turn it off or what you can do with it. I really just need to dive deeper into it. But if you close the tubes at the end, it wouldn't be over, would it? No, it wouldn't end, because with this orgone energy, as I said, you can't. It's omnipresent, everywhere. Yes, it's in the subatomic area, the blue. This is energy, the 0-point energy, how some call it, Jiprana, or I don't know. You can't end it. Otherwise, we could say a kidney wouldn't be a kidney. This is the 5th field, and everything is organized in its place. Yes. Let's go again. We just talked about radioactivity and what Wilhelm Reich had to do with it. And we are currently in the situation with Fukushima, Japan. What can you do there with this technique? So, in my opinion, and according to my experience in Algeria and Wilhelm Reich, one would really need to use my advice with the Cloudbusters. It would really weaken this radioactivity into a natural cycle. The most important thing is that Uraner effect. With that kind of power, what do you call it? A meltdown. Or something like that happened. How do I explain? We have to restore nature before this solidification and everything becomes lifeless and broken and people start contracting cancer and leukemia. We have to work with Cloudbusters. Because the Cloudbuster pulls this into another form and into water. I have, through my research in the desert, noticed that water also absorbs this Dor energy and it really no longer exists in the water. That's right. I'm pouring the water I'm creating on my plants in the desert, right? Last time, when I was there a year ago, we arrived and there were real streaks of clouds. Of Dor clouds, as I call them. We worked not even for a whole day and were able to restore the wonderful clouds and blue skies. And the good thing about this is, you immediately notice that there's a different atmosphere, a different wind, and a completely different quality in the weather. Yes, but radioactivity, that's something where people think, oh, that's not easy to get rid of. Could you help in Japan if they asked you? Could you say, I know how to do it? I'd love to. I would do it. Yes, I'm not going to put myself in any danger or anything like that, but I can certainly start working in the areas nearby, or on the periphery, and then slowly just contain that. Yeah, so it wouldn't become dangerous, so to speak. Wilhelm Reich did that in his time with gamma rays and so on. The proof of this is that nature is alive again, yeah? This is to say, everything comes back into proper circulation, and everything is somehow stirred up and swirled again, and the weather returns to normal. Because with what we know, if I want to clean something, for example, I can just do it. You can see that when the bathtub drains, and if there's dirt in it. Yeah, it's spinning. If you don't move it, yes, then the dirt stays, but if you just mix up the water a little bit, then it'll exit in the middle, yes. The dirt will be washed out of the ground. The Schauberger vertebrae, or whatever you call it, that's been proven several times, and there are even people in Switzerland who are building power stations right now based on this technique. Because this technique isn't as explosive compared to others as the wheel. Yes, the force. That means we have the speed outside, very fast, and inside we have 0. It's explosive but implosive at the same time. If we have 0 speed outside, it's getting slower and it's always fast inward. What's fascinating about these energies is the more we use them, the more we get. There's an additional force that physics actually ignores. Yes, not the centrifugal force, but the centripetal force. That means if we have a teacup, yes, the tea leaves, if we move the cup, they go to the middle, not to the outside. That means there's a force we actually largely ignore. The whole of science would essentially have to be rewritten. Yes. We don't have any traction on Earth. It's pressure, which was discovered by Newton. We are being pressed down by this orgone energy. The Earth's gravitation doesn't exist. That's another phenomenon, right? There's a lot of other technologies. Yeah, and so I'd have to explain the world differently. My heart isn't a pump until there is something else telling it to pump. That's a vertebrae. That's that power that's really being achieved. And that's how you can feel it, right? What do you think are the conditions for such findings at the moment? We have a world that largely ignores this, a materialistic worldview which prevails everywhere, and which seems to be the most intent to exercise power at this level, where they do not leave room for anything else. Do you see that there? The chance for change that can come true? Everything tends to lean into this. We've been talking about it earlier. And because there's a wisdom we all know, I just believe in what I see or what I hear. Let me explain. If a tree falls, as we've all heard, it'll make a lot of noise. Everyone will perceive and hear it. But behind the tree, there's a forest growing. And it's much bigger. No one perceives that. And that's the most important thing. When Carlos Saavedra Lamas got his Nobel Prize at the time for a formula he had calculated, Einstein also said this. Most of matter is frozen energy. To create a unit of matter, I need 1 billion units of energy behind it. So, I can see this unit, yeah? Our classic thinking, or lifestyle, our science is interested in this unit, but it forgets these 1 billion other things behind it. But now, people are starting to become more aware through meditation and just increasing awareness. And that's why I said, I used to plant a lot of greens in the desert back then. I would ask, why? Are people going to gain awareness by eating these greens? I believe so, but why is that? Does lettuce have consciousness? I said, yes, lettuce wears its heart in its head, and this is how mankind must carry their heart in their head, thinking with your heart. So you just said, we believe what we see. So in the desert, you can now see that this technique, which is actually not supposed to work physically, according to our old world view, is actually becoming something? That was back then, really, when my wife said, we have to do this. We did, and we were a family business. Now, we want to get this information out there because of practice. How do you say, our theory is good, but no one understands. Practice is better, but no one knows how it works. But my one example is a mixture of both, like the 2D picture earlier. Yes. That's why I mentioned it. You have it. There's both theory and practice in it. But when you have both, you look and you feel something. And that's what I intend to do. Anyone can come to Jenin in Algeria. And when you get there, you'll see what that is. The devices can be found there. So this is a project where you have a lot of land there and you want to form a self-sufficient community? Life, yes. Yes. Could that be something for some of our viewers who would like living in a community like this and do something? If they have an ability, would they be interested in that? That is desired. We made this. We're doing it now open and publicly to the whole world, regardless of religion or faith or direction. Anyone who thinks with their heart can come there, bring themselves in. Life. Right now, we have problems generating income. Anyone and everyone can build a place like this with 15,000 euros as well for themselves down there. The problem is, it's not their own, but they can have it all their life, because you can't inherit it, but that's a contribution that's going faster. Is this a house or a flat or... Yeah, a kind of apartment with a room, with a bed and things in the middle of all that's happening. It's theirs. They can have it and stay there. Even anyone who can't do that, they can say, I'm a mason, electrician, or I do this or that, and I want to live there and bring myself in. It's an eco-village on 30 hectares. We just got 2,000 olive trees which we want to plant. We have 3,000 apple trees. We just got last year, how much? 2,000, I think, apricots? We've planted almost 100,000 trees in total now, with wind protection and everything. Yeah. You can feed yourself sufficiently there, it seems. Definitely sufficiently. We have children growing up there too. We want to build our own nursery. We're in the reconciliation phase after this feng shui phase. Humans, animals, and trees, we all have to come together and live in this space somehow. But there's one condition for the people who live there. I'll have a big round table like Merlin. It'll be there someday, and all the food will be in the middle. It can be salad or whatever we want, vegetarian and stuff. The people, they'll all be sitting around and everyone gets a spoon that's 2 feet long. They'll come to dinner, and they'll want to eat as much as their ego orders them to, but they can't feed themselves. They'll have to feed the person across from them without expecting the other person to feed them back, and the other person will do the same. It's all about thinking about others first, giving without expecting to be rewarded, but be fed all the same. The future can only work this way. Yes, because we've seen how it can so far, and we all know things can't continue as they are. It's a very interesting thing what you have here. I think we'll certainly have a lot of people who care about it. Maybe. One person could do a lot, whether it's radioactivity now or whatever comes. Yes, absolutely, definitely. Maybe there will be requests. I certainly hope so. Yeah, I would like that as well. What has worked down there has been successful because I have others, not just Cloudbusters now. There's this Agnihotra, there are other practices that have also proven very efficient. This radioactivity, along with all the other plagues of this earth, they can all be cured. Because the radioactivity, for instance, when you read Walter Russell and others, it doesn't belong on the surface. Look, if I have a tree, for example, and I have an apple, the apple is ripe. I can see, as a human being with my intelligence, that this apple is ripe, and I can eat it. I'm not going to wait for this apple to fall, broken down and full of worms. That apple belongs somewhere else when you look at the big picture. I can't eat that apple. That's what it's like with the radioactivity. It really belongs under the earth in its natural state, so that humus and that sort of thing can be created on the surface. Oh, I see. Yeah, we can't have this. Radioactivity I have a problem with, and these radioactive facilities that they now build like mushrooms everywhere. Is anyone able really to control these facilities? Apparently not, as we see. Radioactivity is really nature's dead principle right now. It's very interesting. You have a lot of knowledge about this, and I sincerely hope people reach out to you. You have a homepage, Desert Connective Greening, desertgreening.com, and people can find more information there, right? And are able to contact you? Yes. In any case, I can be contacted anytime. I have an email address. But if there are too many emails, I can't answer them too quickly. Yeah, sure. And even now, there are more and more people moving in. There's also an article on this issue, a 3-part of the Space and Time, where the radioactivity problem has also been mentioned. Do you also do seminars or workshops or things of that nature? Presentations. Yes, I'm on an international tour through other countries, because I'm trying to make these countries more aware of the fact that instead of just taking water from the ground and salts rising in the desert, there's something else. I do this free of charge. Don't take any money for it. People invite me, pay for tickets, accommodation. And if they're satisfied, there is an option to donate to my project. I have a vision here from Morocco to Saudi Arabia and beyond Dubai. I want to found a 15 to 20 meter wide green wave in the middle of the Sahara with my method, through different countries. I had this idea 4 years ago, before these riots in Africa, North Africa, and these climate refugees, as I call them, came up. They would have found a place to stay, they would have been taught, trained, and returned. But now, we're in the middle of disaster, which I said a few years ago. It is a shame. We talked before about the fact that Gaddafi had actually built a huge water, including desert greening plant in Libya without the money of high finance, let's say the World Bank, without making him dependent. And now he's being fought and attacked. Yeah, and hats off to what he did. Gaddafi really created an eighth wonder of the world. And he was just before the start of all this. And as you said, he didn't take any money from the World Bank or anything like that. That was his mistake, because he really wants the whole region of Sudan and Egypt and so on to be self-sufficient, independent. You should have seen the scale of this project. What a huge size. It really is an eighth wonder of the world. And he has oil. And when it's all created, I'm sure it'll become a problem for the world. Unfortunately, we see the old powers are still destroying everywhere, but I think it's definitely time for a change. We talked about it too. Yes, that things really can change, and that means it's not going to go on like this anymore. It has changed. There's even someone who received a Nobel Prize for it. He worked with gases. You can liquefy the gases, and if I want to liquefy a gas now, I've really been wondering about that since I heard about it. Someone found out that there's 1% of liquid. That means I'm going to continue until I reach that 1%, until it's all really liquid. In this analogy, this happens with everything, including our development. We're in our liquefaction period now, I'd say at a 99% maybe. We'll reach our percentage soon, and still so few people understand who we are. It would probably take a quantum leap in consciousness. Yes, that's this quantum leap, which Jules-Henri Poincaré calls, put simply, the bifurcation point. Very interesting. As I said, we realize you have a lot of knowledge. We can only scratch the surface of these things, though, in such a short time on this show. But you've shown that you have knowledge that could really help a lot of people, yes, and could advance many other projects. That's why I sincerely hope we could help with this show to make it known, and I hope you'll go further on a lot of interesting things. Thank you, Majid Abdelaziz. Thank you.